going to get started. And I know Marlene, she said, I'm not introducing you, you do it yourself. So that's all cool with me. Welcome to the Wilmot Recreation Complex. My name is Sandy Jackson and I'm the Director of Parks, Facilities, I'm a little short, and Recreation Services here at the Township. And it's my first in-person event in my building, because I started the week before COVID. Literally, the week before, so I'm really happy to be here. So I would like at this time to honor the land that we've been planting these trees on, and read the Territorial Acknowledgement for this evening to kick things off for this evening, and then I'll turn it over to Marlene from there. So we are gathered in Wilmot Township on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas people. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and to Mother Earth. We should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to the land where we live, learn, plant trees, and come together to work as a community. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you, Sandy. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Marlene Knezich. I'm the chair of Let's Tree Wilmot. So on behalf of Let's Tree Wilmot, I welcome you. So how many of you did tree planting this year? Both hands up. Oh, they look a lot cleaner than I saw them the last time. I hope you got the dirt out of your fingernails. Any bugs lately, Cheryl? No? All right. So the first part of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of how Let's Tree Wilmot started. But Sandy, just like she mentioned, we're a project of Wilmot Horticultural Society, and which in turn is under the Ontario Horticultural Association. And without that partnership or being part of that organization, there's no way we got as much completed for a number of reasons. Oh, I'm not using it. Sorry. Thanks. So for a number of reasons. First of all, we already have a relationship with the township. One of the programs with horticulturals, we have civic beautification, and we have volunteers who look after a number of the gardens. So we have a contract, and with the horticulture we have insurance. And I don't know if any of you with other organizations, if you're without insurance out in the community doing anything, it's just not going to happen. And then the third thing is that the Hort is a registered charity. So when people are making donations, then you have a tax deductible donation is available. We give the receipts. But also when we're applying for applications for grants from different organizations, most of the time you need to have a charitable designation. So with the Hort, we would have been an organization with no money to start off with, and having to raise money just for insurance and to move on. So in a year and a half, it probably would have taken us several years. And I'm just going to introduce, there's Lisa Clifford, the president of our Horticultural Society. If you could come up, Lisa. And so we've had a lot of support from the organization, and they also do all the background paperwork. And then here.
Hello. If anyone doesn't know me, I'm Lisa Clifford. I am the current president of Wilmot Horticultural Society. The Wilmot Society, we're very proud of all that you're doing and the planting of the trees in the township and offering the educational learning for everyone to use. Especially right now, you've kept everyone interested and engaged when we haven't been able to get together and have our meetings that we did before. It's nice that the Let's Tree Wilmot offered the plantings and offered educational stuff on Facebook and social media that our members can enjoy and use there as well. So it's been twofold that way. You get to use us and we get to use you. So that works out well for us. It's especially appreciative when we can see what can be done with a bunch of people getting together to try to improve things. We've appreciated that as a splinter group, I had to use that tonight, that you've been so active and able to offer this, and we continue to have a partnership in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. All right. Actually, here, I should be able to do this without my reading glasses, so let's see if they're going the right way. All right. So let's Tree Wilmot, how from then to now. I'm one of the founding members of Let's Tree Wilmot, and I've always loved trees. Since I grew up on a farm and used to wander around, we happened to have both some swamp, we're in floodplain on the Thames River. I grew up outside of Innerkip, and we had some hardwood bush, and a lot of times I think it always was a way to escape. I'm the oldest of 7, so I think sometimes solitude was a nice thing in the forest. So we moved into the area here, my husband and I, in 2011, and I joined the Wilmot Board in 2012. And I don't really know why I even thought about when we should be planting trees, when the idea had happened, but I had approached the board at one of our board meetings. I was a member, and at that time, the other board members, they were so busy with their other projects and that they weren't ready to get into tree planting, and I didn't want to do it all on my own. So, and then shortly after, Myth Valley Eco Boosters started, and I joined that. And one of our members, Betsy Daub, she also had been going to Trees for Woolwich there and doing tree planting, and we got talking about that, and we said, oh, we should be doing tree planting. And so there was about 5 of us, and I thought, great, we've got a team to get really keen on tree planting. And then the township had offered in 2019 an event where all the service groups came together and they were trying to recruit volunteers. And then Dorothy Wilson, who's here tonight, met Brian Bennett, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. He's with Rotary Wilmot, and they were really interested, so we had early breakfast meetings and that, and got started. And then, of course, pushing the wrong button, the township. And we had been talking to them as part of Hort, saying, we're thinking of doing tree planting and that. And they said, sounds great, just when you got your act together, just show us the plan and we'll move forward. So we said, we got to get people going. So we sent out an invite to all the service groups in Wilmot Township and to the community. And we had our first meeting on March 11th. And as Sandy mentioned, I will be using the word COVID. So that was the day COVID pandemic was declared. And you'll see the name's not the same as it is now. We were Let's Green Wilmot, and then just over the coming summer, we just decided, Let's Green, it could be any type of environmental project in that. So we wanted it to show that we are about trees. So that's why now it's Let's Tree Wilmot. And then so with the declaration of COVID, I call it the COVID pause. So nothing happened, even though I tried, but basically the world shut down into the township. Everybody was scrambling with all the times you have a shutdown, then there's something opens. So everybody was scrambling, and we were just learning how to deal with it. But I'm so thankful that we kept all our trails and everything open for people to use during COVID. Because I would have hated to have lived in Toronto when you couldn't even leave your apartments, or all the parks and that were shut. Now, during that summer, Dean and I had a little bit of meeting, and we were just talking about it and of how we're going to move forward in that. And he lives in Morningside, and they do a newsletter. And for us pensioners, the federal government all gave us $300. So for a lot of us, we didn't need the money. There's no restaurants to go to, we weren't traveling anywhere. So suggestions were made to give to like the Family Resource and that center and that, and let's Tree Wilmot. So we got some money. Then it was like, oh my God, we have some money, now we need to do something. And we had applied for a home hardware grant. Brian from Rotary also works for the Tavistock Home Hardware, but they shut down all the grants, so there was no money. And then Wilmot, or the Rotary Wilmot says, well, we'll throw in $1,000. I approached hey, guess what, Horp? We're getting 1,000. Well, we'll throw in 1,000. So all of a sudden now we had some cash flow. And then later on, now Brian Bishop isn't here tonight, but I got a call just not too long before we did our planting event that we did in October, and he says, how many trees do you want to plant? And I says, I'd like to do 100. We didn't have enough money for that. He says, we'll give you 50 trees. So we were all set. The challenge was, we'd never run a tree planting event. I've never even been at a tree planting event. So we were scrambling, went to Zoom webinars, which has actually been a great part of COVID, lots of information coming from all over. I went to Trees for Woolwich. I went to a couple of tree planting events, as well as Stephanie here did. They were wonderful, helping us out, giving us the procedures and everything. And then we planted at Scott Park. It was on a floodplain, so the GRCA was involved, figuring out all where to get trees. And on Saturday, October 24th, on a beautiful day, similar actually, the weather was almost like the last wetlands plant. That was our first day that we got the planting in. And we did have hiccups. We were all totally brand new to this event. And then we had a lot of big trees. We did have a lot of fun that day. There were all kinds of families coming out. So some of the laughs were with Stephanie falling into the hole that she dug. And there was one fellow, Finian. We actually were hauling buckets of water out of the river to water the trees. So there was Finian, he hauls a bucket, was the last tree of the day, and I said, oh, are you giving fish fertilizer? And he says, what? And he looks, and there's a little sunfish flipping around on the soil, so he quickly grabbed that, threw that back in the river. And you know, here we've got the stats of what we had that day, but you know, it's really the stories that was the most important thing that I got out of that day. People like-minded got to meet each other. People had stories. There was like a dad who came with his little boy, and they just came for the experience, planted the tree. The lady there who's on the motorized scooter, Barb, that was her last outing that she ended up doing. She passed away a few months later. And so she was there with her family and a couple of other friends. And so now they have a yellow birch, that's their sort of like memorial tree in that. So, and then Caker Baker donated cookies for that day. So then we went on. So that was our first big event. And then there was a few of us just after that and said we should have a vision statement, so we did that and did a little bit of other work. But basically is we need to restart and get the whole organization going again because of the long break. So we had the Zoom meeting in February, and it was very successful. We had lots of keen people. So this is sort of how many people we had involved before that tree planting, and that policy was just in the fall. So we went from that, better point the right way again, to this after that meeting. And before the executive meeting or committee, we didn't even really have a name. We just kind of were organizing. But now we had a policy, project, education, promotion, and fundraising committee, and with each of chairs for them. And I'm going to say we had a lot of overachievers in some of these groups, so we got an amazing amount of work done.
Good evening. So I'm Marie Tavy, and this is my co-chair, Stephanie Gertz. And we've actually met for the first time in person tonight. So that was interesting. We've talked a lot, so that was fun. Okay, good. So I joined actually just in February, like Marlene said. So it's been a huge learning curve for me. I couldn't physically join into the digging and getting my hands dirty, so I ended up on the education, and then I decided to co-chair the policy committee. And Stephanie was already the lead in that, so I was happy to join with her and coordinate with that. So our committee's job is a lot of background work to help and sustain us reach the goal of planting more trees and protecting more trees here in Wilmot. So I'm telling you up front that this committee isn't the flashy one, right? So that's why we're here first, because the flash is coming soon. But I will say that our group is important. The work that we do and the research is necessary, and it's also rewarding. So so in a nutshell, basically what our group does is we advocate for vetted policies that will, to the various levels of government, whether it be the region or the township, to plant and protect more trees here. So one achievement that we did achieve this year was that we made a presentation to the Wilmot Council and to the Wilmot Council in regards to pointing out that trees can be a great way to achieve the 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. And it was very exciting that night that motion passed, and so it was exciting to be a part of that. So we thank all the councillors here for their support and for all the background work that was done then. So the next slide is, what we focus on next is research and analysis. I think we're...
I don't know. You're not looking. We've got it there.
So that's policy. So back up. Oh yeah, research and analysis. Here we go. So so we've made 3 reports this year of the trees that we see around Wilmot Township. And that first picture there is a tree that is on Regional Road 1 in New Hamburg. So Marlene and I went out one day, and then Mike Schout also went out with Marlene, and we checked out the trees. And this tree is not doing well. You can see there that tree is girdled all around the bottom. And so we created a report for this one that was sent to the region, and then we also sent ones to the township about 2 other areas here at the rec center and also at Optimist Park in New Hamburg. And so that's part of the work that we're doing, just to say, please help us save our trees and please provide better maintenance for them, so when we plant them that they're actually going to survive. And that includes soil, watering, and mulch. So then the next 2 photos are things that we're working at right now, and also the township is, because they are, so that's where our job on policy is really to work, to look at what's going on in the township. And also to see what other municipalities are doing to improve, what's going on here, and adopting best practices here. And so we are looking at, the middle slide there is the development that is being proposed near my house in Baiden. So that's on Snyder's Road West. And then the next one is the development lands. And so we're looking at how do we responsibly make development and intensify, but also try to provide options and encourage developers to also plant trees and help us sustain them as well. So then lastly, basically, and I think all of Let's Tree Wilmot is doing a great job of this. We're cultivating relationships throughout our community to work together to plant more trees and to help us sustain them. And so one of the things that we've been happy to see is that the township is now considering or is now planning to review their tree policies. So we're thankful that they are listening to us. So Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
We were given 3 minutes to your presentation. It is now at 4 minutes, so I'm not going to say very much. Other than if you're looking to do research, presentations, PowerPoints, if you're looking to connect with our township staff, our counselors, if you're looking to help find, research what other amazing things municipalities are doing so that we can bring that locally, talk to us. Because it doesn't seem like an exciting work, but it's pretty empowering when you can actually make significant change by changing 2 words within our policy, within our township. Thank you.
while I try to figure this out, and before I get started, I just want to really acknowledge my colleague who, on the Zoom calls, got more and more pregnant as we started to do our planning. And then she wasn't pregnant, and she went away for a little while, and then she came back and picked up the holiday campaign because she's just so excited about trees. And the best way you can support all that enthusiasm is support the holiday campaign. So that's just a little plug there. I'm going to go the right way. So I'm pretty excited to talk about the Education Committee. And the best way to think about us was a group of highly creative people who came up with some amazing ideas and actually was able to execute on a lot of them as well, which is a rare combination of skills across the group. We started off by doing a lot of ideation. So we cast a very wide net of the types of things that we could do, we might want to do, and then we really started to focus on some priorities. And the first one was a logo. We wanted to have high-class visual appeal for all of the marketing activities that we do, and so we set out to have a logo that would support that objective through all of our materials. Then what we got on was our initial campaign. So we were able to work with the township on this Adopt a Tree campaign and really support getting a whole bunch of homeowners to go online and request trees for their boulevards. That was accomplished through designing a door hanger that the township was kind enough to fund, and then go literally door to door and talk to people in Senegatha, Petersburg, and New Dundee, promote this as a program, and I understand there was 50 additional trees that were requested by homeowners through that process. In addition, we were able to work with the township to update that list of native trees that are available for homeowners to make sure that they're the most appropriate trees for our boulevards and our communities. So with that, we're off to a great start in terms of campaigns, and then we really continue to pick up speed. If you follow our local media, you could not miss Let's Tree Wilmot this year. We had a wide variety of authors on a wide variety of topics, everything from education to actually promoting the work that we were doing, as well as some targeted press releases to help make sure that our information got out there. So, of course, in this modern age, your online and digital presence is just as critical. And so we put up our website and we're able to start to drive a lot of traffic to that and built out a really engaging strategy on our Facebook. So some of the numbers that I'm so excited to share on Facebook, we had 70,000 people see something on our Facebook page. We had 54,000 people look at our most successful post. It was liked 800 times, it was commented over 400 times, and it was shared over 750 times. So that's the type of attention in media that getting for free and real community and real engagement that really helps to bring people along with our cause. Some of the other stuff that you've seen, if you were at some of them where it wasn't pouring rain, you could see this awesome program that we did with the library where we had an interactive experience for families to walk on this story walk and actually have more education and understanding about what was happening and how to support trees. The signs, there's a couple over there. So that's a part of a pilot that's happening at Scott Park under the idea of let's make it so that people like me who have a hard time identifying trees can actually see what those trees are. So that's a pilot installation where we're going to be installing those, and it's heavily supported by Wilmot Seniors Woodworking and specifically Bill Young of New Hamburg to help get those signs built, and then we'll get them in place. Oops. Uh-oh. Ooh. This is dangerous. Can you? There you go. Nice work. Who's in IT, eh? So also we have this display sign that made its presence again at the plantings where it wasn't pouring rain to help show a lot of what's going on and educate around this topic. I'm really excited. There was a grant submission that went into, I have to read this to get it right, Local Initiative for Future Energy Co-op, LIFE. So there's a $1,500 grant that's in collaboration with Waterloo Oxford District Secondary School to do a video. So we're going to have an awesome video for Let's Tree Wilmot out of that partnership. And then the holiday campaign, which came out really recently, which was an idea of Dean's that Andy picked up, and it's just fabulously executed, that's now in progress. So I'm really excited and cannot be more excited for what we were able to accomplish as a team, as well as the amount of fun that we had. There was a lot of laughs on our calls, and we really had a lot of fun while we did all this amazing work. So I really thank all the people that supported this.
Good evening, my name is Dean Peachey, and in addition to the incredible policy work and educational things that were talked about, we planted some trees this year. It took a while to get going in the summer because the province kept doing shutdowns and stay-at-home orders and so forth, but we got one planting in the spring and then a bunch of them this fall. We planted a lot of different trees. People would ask me, so what kind of trees are you planting? And I'd start to rhyme them off, and they were startled because they were expecting like one species or two or so forth. As was indicated, a priority on trees that are native to Ontario, but trying to really increase the diversity of the tree cover in the township. In addition to planting in a variety of trees, we also planted in a variety of places in different sections of the township, in New Hamburg and Baiden and New Dundee and Mannheim and Petersburg. And one of the really fun things for me is just the number of different folks who came on board with this. And so you've seen references to Home Hardware sponsoring a planting, Foresters Financial sponsoring a planting, the various service clubs, Wilmot Rotary, the Optimist Club is in Mannheim and New Dundee, all pitching in, providing support, logistics, people, refreshments, whatever. So it's just been a lot of fun. And seeing the way in which, as Sandy said, this is a community building thing. Yes, we're planting trees, but it's also building community and people of all ages and generations out there. So audience participation time now. If you were not a member of one of these three committees that we've been talking about, and you planted trees this year, would you please stand? Hey, give yourselves a hand. If you were not a committee member and you planted trees more than once, can you stand? If you were not a committee member and you planted trees more than twice in one of our plantings, can you stand? Okay, Jeff, come on down here. And Sandy, I'm going to bring you back up as well. So this is Jeff Dubrick. He's the manager of Parks and Facilities for Wilmot Township, and he's the guy that Sandy said kept first of all inviting us. You could plant here, you could plant here, you could plant there, all these different places, and then arranging for all sorts of logistics. And he actually showed up to plant trees, including at least one Saturday when he was on vacation. He was not working that week, but he was here. We get the sweetest thank you I can think of. This is a giant cookie to represent your giant effort. And I have one for Sandy as well, in terms of all the support from Parks and Rec. And Cody Eby, I think, is not here. If I give you a cookie for Cody, will you actually get
Yeah, we'll get it.
So I'm going to be calling Cody in the morning. Did Sandy deliver that? So thank you very much. There's one person who participated in 4 plantings this fall, this year, who sent his regrets. He couldn't be here this evening. And that was Tim Lewis, who some of you know as the Member of Parliament for Kitchener-Conestoga, and some of us simply know as this sort of community volunteer and tree planter extraordinaire, who showed up and who just worked. And it was really fun because typically midway through we take a break and have some refreshments, invite members of council who are there to say something or so forth. And we would introduce Tim Lewis as a Member of Parliament. He would go, I've been planting trees next to my Member of Parliament. I didn't know what I was doing. But he was great. And so Tim regrets he can't be here. Sorry, I can't give him a cookie, but maybe we'll drop one off at his office. So my thanks to all of you who planted. And it's also time for those who are on committees. The Policy Committee, the Education Committee, Communications. Would you stand up, please? Thank you very much.
I don't get a cookie? Repeated love.
All right. Okay, so now I'm just going to briefly talk about,
Mike?
oh yes. Thank you. Talk about what we're planning or hoping as we're moving forward into the next year and actually in other years. So with this last tree planting, Wayne Buck, there's quite a few who will know who Wayne Buck is. He and his wife used to own Nith Valley. There was a native plant nursery in that, and he was at the very first planting that we had last fall as a tree crew member to help with our volunteers, and then this last one. And in this one email that he sent me after the event, I thought I would share it because it just talks again about how these tree planting events pull together the community. And so it's just, I don't know if everyone can see it, I was moved to see so many people of varying ages, social status, toddlers, families, teens, elders. It felt good to see so many people who care about the community and the environment. Yeah. So exactly what we're going to do next year, we don't know yet because we're having our planning meetings in January in the upcoming in January, February. So the places that we planted this year, the parks, many of them we're going to be planting at them for several years because some of them could use another 200 or 300 trees. So those are going to be future areas, and what year we're going to be doing, we're not sure. And then we've had both Jeff, who gives lots of suggestions about areas to be planted, but also from the community. We had asked community members where they would like to see trees planted. So we have a long list. And we also have a trails committee. So there's going to be trees planted along existing and future trails. And the one project that we're applying for a grant, which we're really excited about, is the Wilmot Recreation Complex and Trail Project. And I'm sorry that this map is a little bit fuzzy, but around the recreation complex and Schmidt's Forest, so this is Highway 78, and then you've got the rec complex, and that's Gingrich Road. So it's this big, long, skinny triangle that's just over 3 acres that we're applying for a grant from Tree Canada and hoping to plant 1,600 trees over 2 years. Dean was thinking thinking of doing it in 1 year, and we thought, yeah, maybe it's a little bit too much. So we'll be submitting that soon, and then we'll hear in the new year if we successfully got that grant. Another area that in the future that we're looking at is Baiden Sandhills. So how many of you have walked up around Baiden Sandhills? Yeah. So there's a number of ecosystems there. You've got the hardwood forest right at the very top of the hill. There's a mainly white pine plantation there. And then you see some rows of trees, and there used to be, University of Guelph had a couple of experiments with both the prairie area, the grass area, and those trees. So it's 5 acres, and first we were looking at this as our first project, but we said it's such a complex location that we need to decide really what we want to do with that area. And also the region owns most of the land. So if we wanted to do something just quickly, the township owns the land around the parking lot, or owns the parking lot, and the trail just going up to before it turns to the right. And so we may look at planting trees there sooner than later just to give a windbreak when you're getting out of the car and walking up to the main part of the trail. And there's been talk, well, maybe we should have a food forest or community garden. So there's been a number of ideas. And so we need to do the research, look at what works best. And it's sandy soil, so it's a drought-tolerant or drought-tolerant stuff to grow there, and there's no water source. So, hit the wrong button again. The Arboretum. How many people do not know, this is the not know that we have an Arboretum? Oh, that's really good, because often we've talked about it, and where's that?
We're
So-
filled with tree lovers.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Where's
So,
the Arboretum? People raise their hands so they don't know where it is.
yeah, how many know where it is? Yeah, look at this, yeah. That's good, I'm impressed. All right, so this is Yvonne Zima, who couldn't be here tonight. She's on the executive, both of the horticultural and Let's Tree Wilmot. She's the lead on this, and this is again going to be something in the future. The township really wanted something happening there, and a lot of community members brought it up, but we have to decide, what do we want out of this site? It's just one thing to plan, oh, well, there's ashes have died and we just plunk a few more trees, like some maybe cucumber, there's no cucumber tree, and a few other things. So do you want to make this an education center, maybe have a little food forest, or have exhibit gardens in there, a mini forest or something? So, and then Yvonne's also with Heritage Wilmot, so that's just been recently put on the non-designated list of historic properties. So there may be some limitations with that, we don't know yet. And then in the future for funding, then through the region, there's an environmental grant that can offer potential funding. So one of our goals is to increase the tree canopy. And so for tree canopy, basically it's just that's the roof that the trees provide a roof. And ideally, and the fonts went off here with the load. I'm thinking, this is not how I put it up. But anyways, ideally it's 30% tree canopy that you want. And we don't know what ours is in Wilmot, but Trees for Woolwich, they had it measured a number of years, about 11 years ago, and their tree canopy was 12 to 14%. And we are probably about there. And just to give an idea, there's not an easy fix to get to 30%. In 10 years, they've planted 30,000 trees, and they're at 16% tree canopy. And the reason is you plant a little tree, and it's like your cocktail little umbrella. So there's not a lot of canopy with that. And it's your big trees that give the big roof. So we're planting now for the future of like 20, 30, 40 years down to increase the tree canopy. And most of the land in the township, like our focus right now is planting on public lands, but most of the land is private. So we are hoping to start working with landowners to encourage them to plant land or trees on their land, both in urban and rural, and also in the commercial and industrial. And policy committee, they covered everything. So we're going to continue working with that. And really what we're trying to work on is that all the trees, once we plant them, that they also live to their full potential. And one example is boulevard trees. Research shows boulevard trees, 20 years, 50% will be dead. And so that's why we're working on topsoil depth and also tree care, so that when we're spending the money on the trees, that they're going to make it. Again, Daryl covered well with the education committee, so we're going to continue that. The life grant is the one we are really excited about doing the videos. And one thing I'm really proud of is this group is so responsive that the township, or even community, well, I don't know anything about that, or can we work on this? Boom, it happens. And so then we're going to continue with that, and with our website, offering resources to the community. The executive committee, this here, I'm just showing this again only because this keeps changing. So this was kind of in the summer. We've lost a few people, and also now education promotion has been split into two. The promotion is separate, and Ashley Shaw, who's not here tonight, she's looking after that. But we've had a lot of people too just say, oh, I found out like Daryl said, I really like to get into the website and do the promotions and that, and we find different areas of more interest now once we've learned more about what all the different things that we've gotten into. And, oops, where's the wrong thing? So one of the things is we need more volunteers, or we can always welcome more volunteers, and we have whatever you're interested in. If you want to, just spend a couple of hours or come just to tree planting days. We are going to be looking at offering pruning workshops this coming year, because one of the important things is to make sure the structure of your tree stay is proper early to prevent cost in the long term. Also, here we plant trees, but they also need some aftercare. We just don't toss a tree in the ground and just leave it and forget it. So we're looking at volunteers to even help us with either watering and preventing beavers from eating trees, putting chicken wire on and other wraps of stuff like that. So there was, I believe, a form handed out to people that went out. And then if you want to get a reach us, we've got Facebook, our website, and let me get the right button. And Dean, we're going to just do a quick, you're going to talk about the program that he and Andy put together.
I'm going to share with you a beautiful fundraising campaign that's been created for Let's Tree Wilmot. Dean Peachey came up with the great idea. He worked with Andy Shinny, who created this beautiful graphics. And there is a jingle with this, but we were unable to use it with this particular film. Have a look. If you want the full experience, plus getting all the details, go to our website.
So I have the pleasure of introducing Phil, who is the Wetland Conservation Designer for the Mike Schout lands. I got to meet him the Friday before the planting day, so we got to help him unload trees and that. I find that it's just an amazing project. It's just, the scope is huge. I walked behind there and I snoop around and see all those plants and trees that have been going in the back. So Phil serves as on the board of directors of Ducks Unlimited Canada and chairs the National Conservation Programs Committee. Locally, Phil walks with landowners through process of permits, funding, design, restoration, and excavation of wetland projects on private and municipality lands. He's the chair of Reforest Oxford Committee and vice chair of Stewardship Ontario. So, and he grew up here in Wilmot Township, found out, but he's now a long-term resident of Oxford County, which I'm originally from. So, give it over to you. And Daryl, he's
Thank you, Marlene. Yes, I grew up in Wilmot Township, just south of Hayesville, on a farm right beside the Nith River. It feels appropriate to be doing a project in your town next to the Nith River. And very happy to be in the area quite a bit and living in the township of Deesor, Tavistock, as Marlene said, in Oxford County. And about a year and a half ago, Mike Schout called me up one day and asked if I would take care of a project that he was hoping to be a part of with Wilmot Township and all your great staff and volunteers. And it actually worked out. And I thought, how often do you get a chance like this? It's like a once-in-a-lifetime sort of thing to get an opportunity to do a lot of restoration work of different types of habitats and plant trees. So my first slide I thought I'd show you is I believe in what you're doing, and I do it myself, and I understand Let's Tree Wilmot has a few favorite trees, and I believe tulip is one of them.
Yep, we've done tulip, yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't plan to be, like I planted that before I knew about you folks, but I thought I had to show you that I am right there with you. So this is a shot of the Mike Schout wetland before anything was done. And how often do you get a blank slate with which to work upon and to look at and try to find all the different things that you could possibly do? So there's too many to remember offhand, so I'm going to list them off. All the different things that when you're trying to transform a landscape you're capable of doing. So on this particular site, we have wetland creation, reforestation, pollinative planting. There'll be like between pollinative and wet meadow about 25 acres of it, which is really important, isn't it? Snake hibernacula, that always gets people really excited, I think. About 1.5 kilometers of trail, most of which will be boardwalk, and a heron rookery, an osprey nesting pole, which either an osprey hopefully will use or a bald eagle. It'll be about 52 feet out of the ground and right out in an open spot that's often very good for these type of birds. There'll be an increase in beneficial insects because when you have all of this grasslands and pollinative and water, you have a large volume of insects, which of course then results in a larger number of songbirds, which results in other types of wildlife that follow that whole chain of events. Biodiversity, which is a really big thing, isn't it? Water table restoration. Nowadays, a lot of people's wells dry out because water leaves the scene too fast, and a lot of places there aren't enough trees to slow the flow of water down. So this project, and a lot of the other ones I'll show you, will definitely help with the water table. Flood reduction, because wetlands and a forest cover and grasslands absorbs a tremendous amount of water. And it'll also help reduce or increase the amount of water flow in the tributary that runs out of this property into the Nith River by steadily releasing the water. It's like the land breathes. It breathes in water and breathes it back out again, and it does it every day of the year for every decade that the project's in place. And it will also be a carbon sink, an urban experience for nature, because nowadays, what is the population of Canada? 80-something% urban, something like that, and no doubt going to be much larger than that over time. So to have treed areas, natural areas with biodiversity that have access to, like for people to have access to, is really important. When I grew up on our farm, you just ran anywhere you wanted, jumped in the river, and you had great access to incredible natural experiences. But if you live in a heavily built up area, how often do you get to see something like that? And then there'll be turtle nesting sites and logs for turtles to sun on, and the list goes on and on. So it is a great challenge to plant trees, and I like planting trees with a machine. You can see that the Grand River Conservation Authority has a tractor and a planter up there, and I'm not really big on planting in straight rows. I mean, sometimes you have to, but I think that a lot of times trees planted in a very contoured way helps them to look a lot more natural. And this is a shot of Grand River Conservation Authority professional planters planting tall stock trees this spring down at the Schout Wetland. The idea here is to create a riparian buffer along the side of the Nith River to connect one side of the property to the other side for wildlife corridors, and also to help slow down water flow and to create that biodiversity that we're talking about. And boy, these folks are really good at planting trees. At this point, they planted 4,200 seedlings in the spring, and about 450 tall stock trees this fall. And now that the wetland restoration is almost complete, come spring there'll be a considerable number of tall stock trees and wildlife shrubs and more seedlings planted along the edges. But there will still be lots of opportunities for Let's Tree Wilmot to plant, volunteer plantings. So in some of the areas that I've been involved with, like this shot, is a place called Hodges Pond, which is just south of Woodstock, and it is about a 1,200 acre site that the County of Oxford owns. It's where the city of Woodstock gets most of the drinking water. And the area where you see the long thing of water is kind of the reduced lake. It used to be a much larger lake, but The stream was blocked about 100 years ago, and so one of our objectives was to open the stream up again, get it free flowing for fish, get the water quality back again, because if you have an area where water is just sitting, sometimes it's fine, but in a large spot like this, the water was only about 10 or 12 inches deep, and the sun just heated up the water. By the time the water ran over the spillway, it was very warm, low in oxygen and high in bacteria. But as soon as we opened that dam up and restored that stream back to free flowing, it was a great moment. That was about 2.5 years ago. And within a few hours, as soon as the water flushed out, now you already had cooler water, better quality. And then how often do you find a woodlot that's of this size anywhere in Waterloo Region or Oxford County? You were mentioning that one township, I think it was Woolwich, is about 12% or 16 or 13%, something like that. Oxford County has about 12% tree cover, which we think is pretty good, but it's a far cry from the 30% that we realized would be best. So sometimes when you do a project, the one shot that I just showed you is at the top of the screen. The neighbors all watch and see what you're doing, which is great because then they join in. So one of the neighbors decided to have us in, and you see a number of wetlands about the middle of the screen that we did after this other project had started. And then about a year ago, the city of Woodstock agreed to a project further up, closer to the 401, that accepts runoff from the hospital and a big truck stop, water off the 401, and quite a section of the city of Woodstock. All flows through these two wetlands, settles out, cleans up the salt and the oil and the grease that comes off the road, all those things that you can't really help, but these natural environments are capable of cleaning up or cooling down, transforming that landscape. Same with a boggy area. Sometimes we'll add in wetlands around the edges to open up the monoculture that's there and get more of a diversity of insects, amphibians, invertebrates, birds, animals. Or some, in this case, this is a large beef farmer down by Drumbo. And what they wanted to do was any water that comes into their land, they wanted it to be higher quality when the water left their land. So we created this large wetland in a low wet spot that would never produce much of any kind of grazing, and but would never really hold that much water either. So now they have their staged grazing with beef cattle all around this wetland, and then they fenced off the water going out of the marsh down to the stream, and they fenced off the stream and planted the trees, and now they've got lines of trees on the farm again. And modern agriculture nowadays, it's kind of important to have those wide open fields for the type of equipment that gets used. But it meant the loss of a lot of windrows and kind of naturally functioning windbreaks. But there are ways to redo them, kind of change the way things are done. And I think that's what you're accomplishing with Let's Tree Wilmot too. Or along the Nith River, there are various places where there are low-lying areas that have been drained or altered greatly over the years, that we go back in and deepen them, widen them. About the depth, the greatest depth we go is about 2 meters, but most of the wetland would be about 1 meter or less, so that you have shallower waters that can support a variety of aquatic plants. And all over our townships, there are parcels of land like this one that just sit idle. You can't really farm them. Most people don't graze livestock anymore. You can't get big equipment in there. So what do you do with a piece of land like that? You transform it into something that's naturally functioning again. And this particular site, we haven't done a project on it yet, but the landowner is still considering it. So what we would typically do there is open up that low grassy area in the middle for a marsh, take some of that good topsoil that's washed off the surrounding fields over the decades and put it back on the field, and get that aquatic life back in, the amphibians, and it's surprising where all these creatures come from as soon as you create that habitat. And water wants to flow through, so if we have an area that the water sits and accumulates, it fills up this water table around the area, and some of the farmers have said that their crops have definitely improved because during those drought periods that we seem to be getting more of, the time between a serious drought and the next rain is lessened. And a lot of times industry like to join in. This is a place called Air Farmers Mutual Insurance down by Air, and they have their parking lot and property all set up so water all funnels down towards this wetland, and in the green space between the parking lot and the marsh is a low wet area that captures water that runs off their parking lot, and it helps to clean out the salt and gas and oil before the water filters through a rock bed into the wetland that will be restored. The marsh that's on the top end of the screen is like it's always been, but it's one of those water bodies that water comes in and there's no real obvious place where it leaves, so it just soaks into the water table. It's a great catchment basin, and eventually finds its way down to the Nith River. So this is a before shot of a farm that had been tiled, and the farmers agreed not to tile the entire field. There's this one low spot, and they're big believers in trees and windbreaks and conservation, and we talked to them about, what if you took this low spot and put these wetlands in, and it will help keep your water table up. Your tile drains will still lower the water on the surface, you can get your good crops, but the marshland will help keep that water table in good shape. So they decided to go along with it, and about 2 years later, it looked like that. That's a fantastic experience when you transform some kind of a landscape, and as your time goes on with Let's Tree Wilmot and the Rotary Club and Wilmot Horticultural Society and the work that the township does and Eco Boosters, you start to see the results of your work. And since this photo is taken, most of the trees are substantially larger, and the whole system is functioning very well. Oops. There. That was lucky. Another example of a woodlot just north of Shakespeare, and a reforested section at the bottom left, a natural forest, hardwood mixed forest on the top, and an area that had been cleared years ago and over pastured. We restored it back to this wetland complex in a way that works with the woodlot. And this is one of the source areas for Wilmot Creek. So it's quite fascinating to see your land transformation with an area that's been highly degraded over the years, and to bring it back to some kind of a naturally functioning system. Here's an example of one of our neighbors just north of Woodstock. There's a big patch in the middle of their farm where we put the wetland in, but there's a significant amount of land that isn't being farmed. So at some point, what do you do with that land? So the thought is, do you reforest the whole thing, or do you farm some of it, or do you tile the whole thing and drain it right out? So I'm finding more and more people are saying, well, you can't farm everything, right? They've got to keep something there to have that biodiversity. And the guy that owns this farm, he said, well, I'm kind of the guy that's been trying to farm that for years, then I got to realize that maybe nature just wants it to be wet. And he decided, you know what, maybe I should just work with nature a little bit more on this. We've got lots of farmland around it. And then him and his wife also decided to plant the trees along the road, the vertical or the angled road at the right-hand corner. And interesting thing, all the trees on the other side of the road were big, beautiful maple trees. And of course, they don't like the salt, and they get a little bit poorer in quality as they get older. And so the big old maple trees were dying out, but the trees that were planted on the other side now are replacing them. A lot of them are like 25, 30 feet tall. And then there are areas in our townships where there are wet, swampy areas that have been maybe grown in with Phragmites, which is a type of plant that is infesting a lot of wet areas. Very tough to get rid of, but you can get rid of it. So what we did was we went in there and took That larger body of water was about half the size. We expanded the whole area, added all the different smaller wetlands on the left. One of the neighbors across the road, he was coming in to work the land. It was late fall, and you see a small wetland just on the right-hand side. Well, he got stuck there twice, so I went over and said, "Are you sick and tired of that? Would you like to do something about it?" And he said, "I sure would. It's kind of tiresome. I've tried this for years and I'm often getting stuck." So he agreed to put in this wetland. And so what he did is he took his equipment and drove in a contoured line to indicate where he would normally farm. And then the wetland was built in, and of course everything got treed afterwards as well. But a large complex that the town of Tillsonburg might someday go to and drill a big well to help get water source for the city. And a spot like this could easily handle something like that. A doctor down by Ingersoll has this country property. And he said, "You know, we farm right down to the edge of the creek, and we never get much off that patch of land." And so he said, "We'd like to put in a wetland and reforest it, so the water body is at the top right corner, and the rest of the land is planted in trees, and there's still the best part of the farmland is still left, because obviously good farmland is very important to keep as good farmland wherever you can do that." And then they also planted the trees along the road. The point I'm trying to make is that attitudes seem to be changing, that people want to plant trees, and they want to plant the right ones, and more than just one type, and they want to have them survive. As Marlene was talking about earlier, the proper planting, the right type of species, watering, and aftercare so that they live for their lifetime, full lifetime. And another example of transforming the landscape, this is an area where there was a significant amount of reed canary grass, essentially a fine enough grass. Is great for pastured cattle in the old days, but it doesn't really let anything else grow. So we excavated out a fair number of wetlands on 2 properties, spread the topsoil back on the fields, and raised the level of the field up, still sloped the land so that runoff could get off the field and into the marshlands. And the farmers now have a much better crop at the edge of the marsh, and they also have these wetland structures that slow down some of that fast flow that eventually goes in a stream that runs into the Nith River. So we were talking earlier about donations, or what do you do as a volunteer. So I can't really be up here talking if I don't put my own money where my mouth is, right? So this is our farm, and at the top, near the top of the green area, you see a big patch of red. About 10 years ago, the Ministry of Natural Resources came to us and said, "You have a perfect spot here to plant red and white oak for what is known as an assisted migration program." The idea is to bring in these type of oak trees from Ontario, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, plant them in areas where studies can be done to see which ones do the best. And if the temperature of our area is higher in 50 years, which of these oak tree species will survive, produce acorns, and thrive? So we've got another 40 years to go to find that out, but they figure in about another 8 years they can come in and start to do what they want is to harvest the acorns and use the acorns from these oak trees as the seeds for their tree nurseries. And there are, I believe, 6 of these types of assisted migration sites in southern Ontario. So, and we're big believers in windbreaks, and along our road, a group called the Men of the Trees. When one of you folks was talking about naming your organization, back in the early 1900s, or maybe late 1800s, the area decided it was too bare. In fact, I look at old pictures of Wilmot Township and some of the other areas around here of 1920s and 1930s, most of the shots look pretty barren. We actually seem to have a lot more tree cover now than we used to back then. So a lot of these men, and some women, I don't know why they didn't call it the men and women of the trees, but maybe they will now. got together and the government subsidized the trees, and they started planting trees along the roadways. So a lot of the large maple trees you see along roadway areas were planted by a program such as that, and volunteer groups like yourself took on the work and the responsibility to do it. But those trees are now, a lot of them dying out. Some are still pretty good. So what we're finding is that the townships of East Zora, Tavistock, and Southwest Oxford have all joined in with our stewardship group to plant trees along the roadways. That's usually about 150 to 205, 6-foot tall stock deciduous trees, and something that will last quite a while and not be too big a spread or encumber the farming and the agriculture on the edge. And the idea is to start getting more townships to start a tree planting program to replace some of the trees along the roads, especially now that all these ash trees are dying out and a lot of roadways are getting bare. So there seems to be a big interest in that sort of thing. This is, at our place, we took about 3/4 of an acre of our back lawn out and put in a pollinative planting. And it's incredible how fast those plants will grow. And the number of insects that you see, and we're starting to see more songbirds as well. And along our road, it's a little back road, quite hilly, and an example of some of those beautiful old sugar maples that we all know so well. And our township is really good at how they prune these trees and how they are careful with how they prune. And I think that's just a wonderful story. I mean, listening to you folks talk earlier about how important it is to take care of the type of maintenance that you use, what type of pruning, it's a great example how that's done. So if you remember back a few years ago, Toronto flooded out on July the 8th. I think it was 2013. This is an example of it. So transforming the landscape would help reduce some of this. We'd never get rid of flooding, that's just a natural event, but I suspect we have way more flooding than we used to, or more severe. But what a great shot, right? Driving down Don Valley Parkway and managing to get through. Well, you see this on the news all the time now. And then another picture of Lake Erie with an algae bloom. And this is, I believe, near Port Rowan. And part of what you folks are doing will help reduce that, because every time you have more tree cover or on farmland, the water or the fertilizers are, and in industrial areas or urban areas, fertilizers, nutrients, etc., are not allowed to just run off in large numbers. This sort of thing can be greatly reduced. I think there'll be a time when Lake Erie will be much cleaner again, and Lake St. Clair as well. Sometimes when we're transforming the landscape, we have to build quite a good-sized dike and dig out areas to create these wet areas. This was a Mennonite farm where the folks would clean out the ice in the wintertime and put it in their insulated shop. That's what they would use to cool their fridge and everything throughout the rest of the year. And he took about 10 acres of the slope out of farm production, because he said it was always eroding on him, and he never got much of a crop. And he put more effort into the more level land, and it worked out quite well. But this is kind of like, I often think, land that's been severely disturbed sometimes needs to be redisturbed until you can get it back to some kind of a naturally functioning sort of place. Here's another example. This is on Wilmot Creek, just outside of Bright, Ontario. And this farmer decided, I'm not pasturing my floodlands anymore, and haven't for years, so what should I do with all this land? And so he agreed to have several wetlands built on it, or constructed. And another example of when you have to disturb land so much to get this. Same spot about a year and a half later. And if you look closely, you can see the white pines to the right of the water. And these several wetlands here absorb some of the flood water that comes through Wilmot Creek, and again feeds that water table. And more people are fencing off their streams and waterways. And I remember when I was a kid, cattle were everywhere, and it was just the normal thing you did back then. But now that has changed, and people put up good fences, and the streams are running cleaner. And every once in a while, you find a really good spot that has great visibility to create another wetland, and then all the plants and trees that go along with it. This is the same wetland from the air, right along the 401, just down by Woodstock. And many people have called to say, I see the ducks coming in, or I see the deer running across, or it just looks great, because over the years I've noticed this marsh is year by year getting less and less and drying out more. It's a great feeling to restore something, and I think that's part of the beauty of what you do when you're planting all these trees. I think Sandy said you planted about 500 in the township already? Or 800. So even better than we thought. A small wetland that was built beside a barn where the manure yard is situated, and sometimes you have runoff from a manure yard that goes into a stream, a water course. Here was built so that very little of the runoff goes out, but what does comes into this, all this vegetation at the edge, and the water going out is much cleaner. Now, I don't know how clean it is, but it sure looks cleaner. It's clear, and there isn't this reddish colored water running into the creek. So this is one of Canada's largest urban wetlands. It's about 80 acres in size. It's in the city of Woodstock. And I've been trying to find out which city in Canada has the largest one. And it's kind of tough to find what that is, but irregardless, if you look at the top end of the wetland that's kind of just plain grass, that got restored over the last 3 years with a fair number of excavated wetlands and local groups planting trees and wildlife shrubs. And then of course we added a trail to it so that, again, people can have access to nature. And if you look at it from another angle, it's a pretty large piece of land, and eventually the trail will go right through it. And they're scheduled to have a lot of school groups planting. About 3 weeks ago, 50 students from high school in our area joined Upper Thames River Conservation Authority and planted about 450 trees in 2.5 hours. That's pretty good. And some of them were taller and some was shorter, but boy, these kids knew how to plant, and they did them quite well. I mean, we had to pick up 2 trees that were dropped on the ground that they were leaving as they came in, but that's not bad. They got planted. And sometimes you get a really interesting, unique situation. This is a lake bottom on the lake that I mentioned earlier called Hodges. And what we're doing here is part of the requirement of the permit from Upper Thames Conservation Authority was to get more trees planted on this old lake bed. Well, this was the mud flats of the bed, and it was super wet, so last winter it was cold enough. We finally had some cold weather to do this, right? It was cold enough you could go in with an excavator and clean out the snow. After a couple nights of freezing, it was firm enough you could go further and further, and we dug all these pits and mounds, and then in the spring we all got planted in white cedar to recreate a swamp. So again, great example of how much disturbance you have to do to disturb an area to get something natural back. This is a wetland that was built just down the road from you, just behind or just to the north of Walter Roxford High School. There are a lot of private individuals who want to do their part with their land, especially land that they can't do anything else with. And so we're able to create this really great wetland that accepts runoff from the local field and just flows naturally out into the adjacent swamp. So this is a plant that I spoke about earlier called Phragmites. And I must say this is a patch of Phragmites much larger than I've seen before. You can imagine by the size of the excavator. But we knocked it off, and we had treated it a few weeks earlier, and then knocked it down and then created this site on it. Again, by the 401, and 2 large wetlands, but you can't really take these wetlands out and expect them to survive if they're going to be full of Phragmites. So the plant has got them under control. We have to treat it the second time, but it just shows what can be done. And sometimes when we're transforming an area and turning it back into a natural habitat of some kind, say a wetland like this, as soon as you dig up the local ground in the area, and all of a sudden up comes all of these plants whose seeds have been sitting for decades. I don't know how long the seeds will last in the ground, but all the aquatic plants that we're wanting to grow finally did, and I think that's beautiful. The wildflowers didn't seed any of this, it was always there. And so were the aquatics, and the same spot from another angle showing more construction further up as the wetlands got further developed. Just goes to show that nature will work with us if we give them a chance, and nature works with us whether we're doing conservation work, farming, working in the city. We're all part of this natural cycle, and it feels good. I think that's one of the things the pandemic has taught us even more, or brought to the forefront, is the importance of a clean environment. So I'll leave you with this last photograph, which is just a shot of a natural swamp in the background, restored wetland in the middle, and native trees and wildlife shrubs in the foreground, planted by high school and elementary students. And they are doing well there. And I often wonder, why do we all do what we do as far as participating in this kind of natural work as a volunteer or otherwise? And I'm sure you've all heard the saying about some old men were planting trees, and people came by and said, well, why are you planting all those trees? You're never going to sit in the shade of those small little trees. And the old men say, well, if we don't do it, who will do it, right? And so the folks say, well, so who are you doing it for? And the men say, well, we're doing it for everybody's children's children. And I guess that's kind of a good example of what volunteerism is. You're thinking about lots of other people and recognizing you play a part in it. So I've taken up my time. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of, I guess I'll speak for the township as well here, but let's Tree Wilmot and Wilmot Horticultural Society, thank you.
You're welcome.
And also thank you for the opportunity we had to plant at the wetlands. That was a real treat. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
Are there any questions at all? Just
Yes.
because we're, for Phil, anyone? Dorothy?
When you said you treated the phragmites, what do you treat them with?
It's a type of Roundup that's
Oh, okay.
specific for Phragmites. And in most places, you're not allowed to spray it over water. There's another type that you can. It's becoming more readily available. And it's great to have that. The idea is that at Ducks Unlimited, we're trying to develop a way to naturally remove Phragmites, not by digging it out, but some way that's more natural with which to do it. But all along the 400 series highways in our part of the country, and it's creeping out west, you see they're beautiful looking plants, but they take over, and their stems are like an inch apart, and they're the size of your finger, and apparently lots of turtles die in them because they try to get through them, they get caught, and they can't get out. But it means that all this frag takes over a wet area and nothing else can live there.
So when you treat it and then you cut it down so it's not being dug up, it's just going to die then?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
And sometimes most times you have to treat it a second time because there'll be some residual growth that'll come back, but after that it's usually pretty good. Yes?
You mentioned salt-resistant trees being planted along roadsides to replace the ash borer trees. Can you name a few species of trees that would be good from that area?
Well, the oaks seem to be doing fine in our townships. That's what they're planting along the roads mostly, and they use the advice of the foresters to do it. Now, I gotta say, a lot of these roads are back roads. They don't see a lot of salt. But I would only be really guessing to be able to tell you which ones are most salt tolerant, but I know Austrian pine is salt tolerant, and some of the softer maples seem to do fine, and most evergreens don't really like it. And I planted a bunch along a pretty busy road that is I'm just trying to think what the name is, kind of like locust trees. Yeah. Yes.
So each year, this river floods in Hamburg, and you're talking about how marshlands upriver
Yes.
could potentially prevent the flow of water going into the Nith as fast, or if there's marshes, then other areas need to flow into them to pick up water. If you were to make an estimate, how many more marshes should we be adding along the Nith River in the next few years that would actually make a difference in the flooding of New Hamburg?
I don't think there's a figure other than everywhere that there's an opportunity to do so, because a lot of areas aren't conducive to it. But there are quite a few spots on a floodplain that are low lying that if you can get the proper permitting for it, that it would make some kind of a measurable difference. And I should say, as an example, the Schout wetland, the watershed for that 55 acres is 260 acres of New Hamburg that flows through, and it's kind of exciting to think about building some kind of a structure, whether it's there or all through the watershed. But that's really what Ducks Unlimited is trying to do partially, is to increase the density of wetlands on watersheds, and we're really starting to gear up more for urban areas. In fact, the insurance companies, quite a number of them in Canada, have joined in with us to help sponsor this sort of work. And the idea being, if you kind of look at how can you make your cities and urban areas and the rural watersheds more absorbent, maybe there are fewer basements that get flooded. And it's just a different way of adapting to the way we get larger rainfalls. I don't know how you handle something like that in British Columbia, where you have like incredible changes like this, but it seems to be becoming more of a normal thing. But yes, to answer your question, how many wetlands do we need? Wherever there are locations that they make sense to build, and certainly not in the middle of a 28 or 30 or $40,000 an acre cornfield, but on marginal lands, edges, and floodplains, and built-up areas where there's some parkland that's needed or some green space. And yes.
So size-wise, if this is a pitch to farmers or pitch to people that have private land, what types of property, if I'm a landowner and I have land, what type of property do I have that say, I'm going to contact you now if I'm hearing this?
Yes.
And, is it certain size or a certain shape, or how big or how small?
As big as the property has. In some places the wetlands are smaller, in other places they're like several acres in size, or like one of the pictures I showed earlier of this large wetland down by Tillsonburg, they're like 40-acre size, and it's good to have landowners who will actually join you in that sort of thing and allow permanent changes on their properties to absorb more runoff. Any others? All right, thank you.
Okay.
This concludes our evening's activities. Thank you, everyone, for attending Let's Tree Wilmot's first fall celebration, organized by Dean Peachey and his team. They did a great job. I had a good time, and I hope you did. It was great for everyone to be together. Thank you to all our volunteers who contribute hundreds of hours by planting trees and educating and promoting the importance of trees in Wilmot Township. Thank you to Larry, who has both of his devices out recording this evening. And those many files went on to Tom Knezovich, who did the editing and the creation of this YouTube video. Thank you. Mike Schout provided the funds for refreshments. We had our Let's Tree Wilmot cupcakes for the evening and our coffee and other refreshments. which were prepared by Judy Hahn and Tammy Yonker of Wilmot Horticultural Society Social Committee. Thank you for your efforts and time in the kitchen. Let's Tree Wilmot looks forward to another great year in 2022. See you then and stay safe. Good night, everyone.